Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to this virtual high tea event. It's virtual high tea, but there is no high tea behind it. I only have my cup of tea here. And today, it's my pleasure to have Mr. Mikko Puustinen here with us. Perhaps some of you have seen him on TV here. He's an advisor for Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment. And what is even more interesting is, in fact, he's an expert on China, and he's a fluent Chinese speaker. He obtained his education in East Asian Studies and Political Sciences at University of Helsinki. And I think he has been very active in the Finnish society in promoting the importance of learning about China. And besides his advisory role for the Finnish Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment, he is also the chairman of Finland-China Society. My understanding is recently they have a very interesting new project, completed an online dictionary. Maybe Mikko, you can explain to us a bit what it is as well in today's chat. This is a rather informal event, and the idea is kind of to bring our students here. I know a lot of you have been feeling a bit isolated during the pandemic, and you're also not so sure, what your study will mean for your future career. And since we lack these personal interactions, consultations, students have a lot of questions in mind. So I hope we can use this kind of informal meeting to help you have a more confidence how to prepare yourself for the future. So the role of our speaker, in fact, is to share his personal journey first, how he engaged in East Asian study and then move on to his career. And perhaps Mikko can also give us some advice what to do or what not to do, for planning for your future. And any other question that you wish to ask Mikko, please also take this opportunity just to write your question down in the chat or directly raise your hand. So I think without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Mikko. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, for the kind invitation, and it's my pleasure to be invited by the University of Helsinki and my alma mater. I graduated from there actually in 2000, so it's over 20 years from that point of time. But yes, maybe shortly about the journey, and actually it started from the University of Helsinki in 1993 there with the East Asian studies as my major, as mentioned. So actually before that I didn't have any special relationship with China or even Asia. Maybe I had read few more books or something than the average Finn, but other than that I was basically starting from scratch, including the language. So and to be honest, at that moment I wasn't so sure where this journey would take me, but maybe there on the background there was still, in general level, my biggest interest was in foreign languages, in foreign societies, humanities, social sciences, and politics, international politics especially. So from that point of view, I was very happy to be to get that opportunity to study at the University of Helsinki East Asian Studies. And at that time, by the way, on top of the main language, which for me was Chinese, so the students had to choose another second language, East Asian language, which practically meant for me either Korean or Japanese, and I picked up Korean. I thought it was easier. We had to study 2 years for that, and so did that. And as mentioned, so regarding my other interests, politics, international politics was something that I was very interested in. So I, during my studies from 1993 to 2000, so also I took the political sciences especially international politics as my minor, and I did an extensive, amount of courses on that one. So that's basically, that's my academic, the first education, on one hand on China studies, language, culture, the society, and then on the other hand, the political sciences. So that was sort of my method, or how I look at China. And during my studies, we had, we studied there for 3 years, and after 3 years, our teacher, Wang Laoshi, so she said that you have been good students, but to be honest, if you really want to learn this language, you have to go to China. So after 3 years of studies in the university, so me and also there was a bunch of other students, we went to Beijing for Beijing Language and Culture University, or Beiyou, for 1 year of studies. Actually, we took the same flight with our teacher, who was just returning to China. She was just ended her assignment in the university. So we took the same Finnair flight to Beijing with her, which was, I think, was sort of an interesting thing. But there during that 1 year, so certainly I was able to get my Chinese skills on a higher level. And after I came back, I continued my studies in the university. And then actually that in 1998, around that time, so University of Helsinki, they opened up the exchanges with the Fudan University in Shanghai. So me and Rais Asikan, we were the first students from the University of Helsinki to take on that exchange, to go for Fudan for 1 year. And that was in the end of my studies. And after, when I came back, so basically I finished some of the last courses and wrote my thesis for that. So I graduated in 2000. And firstly, I went just, there was a fair amount of, let's say, there had been expenses during those years, and didn't have any actually scholarship for the Beijing, year. So I just ended up going to work, which wasn't related, directly related to China issues. For 1 year, actually, something, Nokia related work here. But then I have to say, this is one thing. Of course, there are things that you can plan, and then you might get lucky also. So in the end of 2000, I saw this ad on Helsingin Sanomat newspaper, and the Embassy of Finland in Beijing, or the Foreign Ministry, was looking for in a way, sinologist to the Embassy of Finland in Beijing. Annikki Arponen, who had been there for a long time, a very experienced diplomat, also China expert. So she returned to Helsinki, and I applied for that position, and luckily I was chosen for that one in 2001, and then that was maybe a 2-year contract. So that position hasn't been, it's sort of like a fixed term thing, but actually that trip took 7 years. So I went there firstly for 2, but then it was extended to all the way 2008, and so 7 years there as a diplomat, and responsible for reporting about the Chinese, the politics, economics, the society. Finland had and still has judicial cooperation with China. I was responsible for giving support for that cooperation. Also, I had, press and culture affairs. And also every now and then I had to also act as an interpreter for some of the high-level visitors, not too often, which is really difficult when you are doing 99% something else, and then you are thrown into a situation where you should be, doing interpretation. I didn't have any special, education for that. So, but really interesting, and then actually there was, different choices. I could have been taken a step to go to the private sector. There was some interest from some businesses. Also considerations about foreign ministry. But then I actually sort of like chose something in between that, and that was the Shanghai World Expo project. There's this World Expos held, there is, is it the big ones, I guess, every 5 years. So Shanghai was about to host one in 2010, and Finland actually FinPro, or the predecessor for Business Finland, which is helping Finnish companies to become international. So they tried to find people for this project for Finland for the Shanghai World Expo. So 2008, I jumped on that train, which was interesting because, we had like during 6 months, for example, during the expo, we had like more people visiting our pavilion in Shanghai than the whole population of Finland. So there was like some 5.7 million people. After that, short time as a private entrepreneur, as a consultant, but quite shortly there was another new position opened at the Embassy of Finland in Beijing for a person just specializing in communications and culture. And I was in a way asked if I would be interested among others. And I said, well, why not? I had been pushing myself for that direction, that Finland should have persons there to do more for communications and culture, build the image of Finland there in China, and that and that took for another 5 years in the embassy. So firstly 7 years there, then I was like, let me see, 3 years away, and I came back and another 5 years at the embassy in Beijing. A little bit partly same perspective than during the first time, but then going more deeply into to communications. The whole, actually during those years, the Chinese social media was in a way created or some started, because I went there 2011. So things like WeChat, Weibo, and WeChat were just starting up. So actually we did, firstly, for example, build the Weibo, platform for the embassy, and later on, quite soon, the WeChat and others, and so that was interesting too. Then 2016, back to Helsinki, Finland, with my family, and 3 years from 2016 to 19 once again as a private consultant in a private entrepreneur, offering services for businesses and other organizations. And then 2 years ago, the Ministry of Economic Affairs and the Employment established this China position in the unit for EU and international affairs. So on top of the foreign ministry, so China-related affairs are expanding to more and more also to the field of other ministries in Finland. So it's just not about the general diplomatic affairs or the foreign policy and so on and so forth. It's more and more about the economy in a deeper and wider sense. Chinese investments to Finland and so on and so forth. Also other relating to other ministries like the Ministry of Transport and Communications. So as part of that, the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment, they establish this China specific position, and I applied for that and found it still had sort of like this interest in the government affairs and the state to state relations, and that's how the last 2 years have been going on for me. So pretty sort of, maybe if we a little bit go to then what is might be more interesting to students, and sorry, I just tried to get my I have some notes here on another computer, but basically is that my first point is about the fact that if I, by starting on 1993, have been able to find something, let's say, meaningful from the professional point of view in China-related affairs, that's almost 30 years ago. So I'm pretty sure that you or anybody else in Finland who is interested in trying to sort of like build up a career around China in some ways, I think it makes even much more sense now than 1993. So that's my first point to the audience and to students who have started. But then the other point is that you can't just rely on or build your competencies and skills just around, for example, the language, or even purely on China as such. You need to have also other competencies in most of the cases. Of course, if you are, if you will want to be a sort of like, interpreter, translator, or that type of thing, then of course you have to dive really deep into the language and so on and so forth. But in most of the cases, and if you want to have more sort of wide scope of opportunities in front of you, then you have to consider, well, firstly, during your studies, what other subjects you choose as minor studies. There has to be an idea, I would say, that where does this, China studies or Asian studies as a major, and then on the other hand, something else is leading you. How can you use that professionally? So that's I think it's in a way important, and I don't know if I was so smart about it 30 years ago, but in a way it's quite understandable. So let's go back to the 2000 when I was applying for the assignment in the Embassy of Finland. So what they saw from my CV, even though I didn't have too much of working experience, they could see that I was not just able to speak Chinese and know about China as such. I had also some understanding about international relations in general and politics, which is of course very important if you are, the foreign ministry and so on and so forth. So that's one thing, in a way the CV and the contents of it can't be too narrow. There has to be there. And of course, what are those minor subjects? What are the other competencies around that China thing you have there in the core? That's, it depends on what you want to do with your life, or what kind of career or what kind of work do you want to do. Also, I think what is important already during the studies is starting to gather information and building networks that are consistent with the aim that you have, that I talked about professionally. So don't think that the different organizations, whether they're government or business or other, they are come to look for you. You have to approach them somehow. Okay, there's some now, maybe I think in the government and we in a different ministry, there is an understanding that, hey, we have these talents in coming up in the university. But since there are not so many China-specific tasks or positions in the government, it's not too many. It's like, with one hand I can basically name them. So then it's important that you try to gather the information about different organizations that are China related that you are interested in, and also even try to approach them somehow, build in a way the network here in Finland. And by the way, I'm saying this also because I didn't do these things too well myself. Maybe I got lucky and so on and so forth, but just relying on luck, maybe not. It's not the best way. So being there, done that. So also in the mistakes. So I try to be helpful here. One positive thing is that there seems to be maybe more need for China professional on a wider scale in Finland than before. I think there is this, the feeling in different. Once in a while I talk about organizations, but it's like, whether it's governmental organizations, businesses, academic organizations. We have just talked about this these days, also with Julie and others, about the China know-how in Finland. So there's the feeling in different entities that we need to have more people who know about China from different angles, in different professions, in different fields. So I think that's while actually in China the need for Finns or people based in Finland is maybe getting less, to be honest. So let me take the Finnish businesses or companies as an example that are the biggest employer of Finns in China, or people based in Finland in China. They are less and less run by Finns or people based from Finland. They are less and less run. The operations are run by local people, by Chinese people. The amount of Finns in China is getting less and less, to be honest. Of course, this has been a long, long way. It's just partly because the businesses have been, there is a greater amount of talents in China, and they know the language, they know the culture, they know everything there much better than the Finns who go there, and so there is less need for expatriates, people sent from abroad to China. So that's the. I don't mean that there aren't any, but that's the trend. So in a way, less need for you maybe there to be sent there, but then there might be more need here actually in Finland than before. Regardless, my suggestion is that still you should try to go to China as soon as possible, yourselves. And I encourage you to do so already during your studies, if it's just possible. Well, hey, now we have this COVID-19 here, but especially if you are in the beginning of your studies, and so anyway, so there is we can work this out. Maybe next year is even much better. So I would suggest, even though this might not be that easy, in some ways, some people might have the feeling that there are so many problems there. There's pollution, whatever. But I would say it really makes a difference. It's a cliche, of course, but it really makes a difference to study China in China than just here. So, of course, from the point of view of learning the language, so many more opportunities there to do that, but also to see, at least on some level, if you are there in a university, you just see a little piece of how things work in China, but you at least get some sense of how things move around there. And of course, once again, build networks there. So if you are there, at least I'm sure that, for example, if you would be a student in Beijing or in Shanghai, you would be invited probably by the embassy or the Consulate General of Finland to some event. You would meet, people from Finnish organizations, from Finnish businesses, different types. So you would, that would be, useful for your future purposes. So that's one thing. What else? I don't know. I guess I exhausted my, pre-notes, and we can go into more discussion type of thing from here on. Thanks.
In fact, we have so many questions in the chat already, so I can kind of read. I can read it through, perhaps. So the first question is from.
Okay, and also go to the chat. Let me I can open up the chat box. This way. Oh, it's the one Nora has.
Nora, yeah. Consultant work.
Okay, yeah. What kind of things calls on? Well, it depends. It depends. So, as a consultant, maybe my expertise on top of the language, I actually even had interpretation tasks, was revolving around the communications. So, which is of course language related issue. So, for example, I consulted Finavia, which is the company operating the Finnish airports, like Helsinki-Vantaa International Airport and other airports in Finland. So obviously Chinese, well, let's say before the COVID-19, the Chinese travelers became a very important customer for them. They are going through in bigger and bigger numbers through the Helsinki airport, but also other airports. So they, during the past few years, Finavia has been building up their awareness in, for example, in some of the professional Chinese media, and also even among the these social media influencers in China, or through them, in the potential groups of Chinese people who want to pay a visit to Finland. So I was helping actually Finavia in this process, to just give an example. So that was also the idea that, hey, language, not just interpretation, but then the communication, that's a bit larger. That's sort of because obviously I was aware how Weibo and WeChat works, the most the top popular Chinese social media platforms. I had been part of building those in the Embassy of Finland in Beijing. So that's one thing, and I'm sure that there will be opportunities in this when the COVID-19 is past us and the travel tourism picks up. I'm sure it will be pick up later. So that's for that.
And then there is a question from a Chinese student.
Okay.
Do you see that?
Yeah, sure. It's about the cooperation in the technology section.
Yeah. And then is there a need for China experts now in Finland? So the Chinese student has two questions for you.
Yes, there is. I think that's, certainly. If you think about what Chinese companies are interested in Finland, what makes us, Finland is so small, and it's not a market as such, it's as a market for end market for goods or anything like that. And we have some, just few resources. We have lots of forests, which means lots of wood, and then we have some minerals here. But other than that, we don't have too much natural resources also. So the key thing that in Finland has, and in the business side and economies, it's the high technology, competencies, skills. So certainly that I think that doesn't disappear anywhere. It's there. That and it's maybe even more so in the future. So as we know, during the past few years, there has been several cases where, for example, Chinese companies have bought shares of Finnish companies, especially high-tech companies. And there you need people those Chinese companies, they need understanding here about Finland. You don't invest millions or tens of millions of euros somewhere without knowing where you are investing it. So you need people here on the ground to understand. Of course, vice versa also. But I would say maybe relatively speaking, there is maybe in a trend. I mean, from the trend point of view, there might be more need for people who actually are part of this sort of like the Chinese companies going abroad and investments and technology than the other way around. Most of the Finnish companies, not all, of course, there is still potential, but most of the Finnish companies, the bigger companies, have already done their investments in China. They have their own people to do that. But to this way around, it's still interesting. What else? And then there was
a question about your study. So has it prepared you for other general jobs like the consultants that are not directly related to Asia and China?
Sorry, I forgot something from my sort of like my CV or from my experience. So during my first post in Beijing, the embassy. So actually it was it 2004 or 5 roundish? So I did an EMBA degree for a American US university. So I actually had 2 degrees. I have my master's from Helsinki, and then I have this EMBA or Master of Business Administration degree also. So that helped me to understand more about how companies operate, and maybe if you try to take some sort of my general point from there. So, well, as for anything else, it doesn't have to be China related, but you might have to update your knowledge or skills along the way. Like me, I had already started my professional life, but then I felt that that's not enough, especially in the field of economics and business. I don't understand enough how companies operate. So that helped me certainly. And that was something that wasn't, China specific. It was a general MBA course for, that this US university, Rutgers University, by the way, State University of New Jersey, offered there in Beijing. Actually, US University in Beijing. I did it, on top of my work there, so it was busy time. But yeah, so that helped. So that's maybe, you have to see, maybe you graduate from Helsinki or somewhere else. And along the way, you need to see what else you have to study later. And then there is, I guess.
I think the other one is just mostly a comment. Yeah.
Comment, yes, yeah. Sure.
Perhaps I can share, because we have students graduating over the years, and I see a lot of creativity in our students. I remember one of our students, he speaks fluent Chinese, so in our major, but he's very good with music. He has his concerts everywhere, and now he's working in the Finnish consulate in Shanghai. I don't want to mention the name. Yeah, so you can combine your talents in different ways and carve your own niche out. And I have another student, again, I don't want to mention the name. She's doing Chinese studies at the same time doing film studies. So she's very into making documentaries and taking pictures. And now she's working for Huawei in Finland, and because they rely on her skills in technology and also her fluent Chinese skills to work for the Huawei Finland. Just 2 examples.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah. So yeah, actually, yeah. So that was sort of like there. This is just, as I said, this is a feeling. It's not so much sort of like, based on research or anything like that. But there is sort of a feeling that there is a wider scope of work, tasks, positions, fields of interaction where China related skills are needed. Then I think it's the scope is going, and I think one thing is actually it's because it's not like before. 10 years ago, for Finland, actually, in many ways, the China related activities happened there in China. It's the thing was there, but now that China has come here, and there are two, at least, of course others, but also two things that have impacted this. Is one thing is actually the tourism, so that the Chinese people come here in big, have come here in big numbers. So when you have Chinese travelers coming here, they need these services, they need help, in different ways. So that has brought China closer in that sense. The other thing is what I mentioned before is the investments. So it's the Chinese capital coming in, and there this of course is very much in the businesses, partly also in other organizations that there's also this sort of in a way more presence by China in Chinese entities in Finland. Yes.
Mikko, I just out of curiosity, how do you feel when you graduated at that time? Was it very competitive, the atmosphere? There are a lot of students with similar skills and competing for same jobs?
No.
It
wasn't like
more
that.
So. No.
Actually, in the end of 90s, from, of course, the organizational structure in the University of Helsinki has changed from that time, from 20 years ago. But actually, there wasn't too many who graduated from the East Asian major. It was like I understood. I'm not sure, but I understood from other people that that since I graduated, so it was quite like, hey, somebody graduates for me actually. So there was quite a many people who didn't sort of like finish their studies, and among them who finished, there has been quite a many who have then been doing some other jobs, not necessarily related to China. But then also at the same time, the in a way the demand for that kind of people wasn't that big also. So now I think hopefully we have more supply of new talents there, but then there hopefully also there is more demand. At that time, it wasn't that competitive yet. It was, to be honest, there wasn't too many people who had this MA from China studies and so on and so forth. So yeah, so that's hopefully it has changed. I don't know the actual situation.
Yeah, I think the situation definitely has changed, and we have more students in our generally Asian study programs. So the competition is indeed higher. Yeah, and in fact, interestingly, as the current arrangement shows, in fact, a lot of students do have like what you have, like a bilingual ability, like Chinese plus something else, or Japanese, Koreans. This is the trend we are encouraging students to have more linguistic skills than one. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I wonder if you can comment a bit about also Japanese studies or Korean study. Have you known somebody who have done that and then embark on an interesting career path? Any things?
Not so familiar. I think there surely are. There surely are who have taken, for example, the academic career path. Yes, indeed, and of course, I think from Japanese studies, there are several people who have probably, went to that path of Japan related work. But it's well, it is for me maybe the problem is that from 2001 I was basically away more or less 15 years. Well, I was shortly back, from 2001 to between 2001 and 16, but I was away around 15 years more or less. So my contact with many maybe of the people were not so frequent due to that fact. So or they were just more related to people who were in that China circle. So that's how it sometimes happens. But
now I see one more question from Petra.
Yes. Do you know those people who did graduate? You figure out what? Yes. Well, it's difficult to answer, but firstly, those studies, especially the language studies, it's not that easy. It takes a lot of effort to do that, and especially going to that level where you actually write your thesis, pro gradutyö and so on and so forth. So it takes lots of, I guess, sisu in some sense. Then maybe not everybody was so clear about what they were doing. So I think it helps, and I go back to where I started, that that you have some sort of path, you have an aim, clear aim, that what for, of course, aim is that you graduate, but also that so, or if you don't have it, that of course might slow down your studies, or if you're not sure, you might end up I start to study something else, and so on and so forth. So I guess nowadays nobody can be so sure that what is the actual position I'm working in, or what organization even. It's more of a general direction that I want to build my career path around China, or around Japan, or around Korea, and then it leads me somewhere. But this overall aim needs to be there, and maybe not everybody have been so clear about where they are heading.
We have a question from Marita Sika. Well, nice to see you here. She's a very important person for building up, I think, Asian studies in Turku. And she wants to ask you, what is the title of your postgraduate thesis? Do you remember? Or
I think it's there somewhere, there. Yeah. The topic is, I can't totally recall the name, but the point was that China was about when I started to write my thesis. So China was in the middle of applying for, preparing to become a World Trade Organization member, and actually it did on 2001, just after my graduation. But then, which was about trade. Of course, it's about trade, about Chinese economy. It's about opening up, and so on and so forth. And this was the one element. The other element was about, which I was interested in, it was this regional development within China, because China had started in the 80s to open up really, unevenly, or from the East Coast, the special economic regions and zones and others. So when World Trade Organization membership, it should mean that there is one entity, one market, one China, evenly with the same rules accessing the World Trade Organization. So I saw there an interesting question, that how would the China's WTO membership affect the regional development within China? Would those differences between the East Coast and the inland regions become bigger, or would they become smaller, or what would happen there? So that was the basic question in my and I guess it went somewhere in the field of political economy. if you think about from the method point of view. I think from the East Asian, in the East Asian department, what the professor and others thought was important that I use these Chinese language, sources. That was something that, as a major student of Chinese, you would need to, that you don't just use English sources or something else, but I used, read extensively what the Chinese experts had said about these questions. So that's how I got through with that.
Amazing! You remember all the details of your thesis.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Any questions still from our audience? Out of curiosity, perhaps you could tell us a bit about the Finland-China Society in which you are a chairman, and the contributions to the Finnish society, so that our students are aware of it.
Sure, I will. And I guess there was some new question come there. Since China's influence is growing all over the world, is there a need for combined area knowledge? China plus South Sahara Africa. Yeah, I think it's not just about South Sahara Africa, but China versus all over the world, different regions. I think what might be interesting, sort of is this. It sort of goes what the Asian studies is that China, sort of a little bit going back to the history in a way that of academic stuff, also the scholarly works of this China versus the region, East Asia, also South Asia, and the whole, there is, for example, from the trade economic point of view, you might have read China and others, they concluded this RCEP agreement, there. So there is, in a way, seems a path to more integration within that area. So of course it from the political point of view is interesting, but it also from the economic point of, even from the business perspective, is interesting, because many of the Finnish companies, for example, in the region, they do not just operate in China, but they do operate in that area. And their, for example, China operations are, closely linked in what they are doing in Southeast Asia and so on. So that might be, I think, I would maybe, hey, China is a superpower in a way. Its actions anywhere are interesting, but maybe my first feeling would be to look just, to the neighboring area, and not just to Japan and Korea, but also to Southeast Asia. And of course, for example, these questions about, China versus India there, also, how that all develops. The big powers are talking about, the Indo-Pacific, things. So, and was there something else coming up there?
I'm just reading the comments from the students. So
yeah, no.
What is interesting is here, the arrangement in Helsinki University now is that we are in a cultural study group. So in a way, we have professors also focusing on Africa and India and other regions. And even myself, I have been asked to give lecture to their students. In a way, I think students can be more creative. You can rely on expertise here, and then you can have a focus on your thesis on China and Africa, for instance, or China and India. And we do have the expert here, and then we can help you from both sides. And that might strengthen also your knowledge and skill in seemingly two different continents or countries. Yeah.
Surely, just really shortly about China, Africa. So from the economic trade perspective, so I would be interested in more sort of thorough, wide analysis of that, because what you see, at least in the media, but also a little bit more partly of some academic work is that it's a bit one-sided. For example, regarding the Chinese companies in Africa, there are also things, of course, there's the state point of view and so on and so forth, but then what the private companies are doing there, Alibabas and everything, it's very much Chinese companies see Africa as an, future China. In a way, making a huge leap from where they are now, or the Africans see that China was like them in 40 years ago. So it's interesting. I don't know how much can you build some career on that. Maybe not, but at least maybe thesis might be possible, yeah, or of interest.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm highly interested in this China-Africa linkage. Lately, I had a seminar, and then one of our speakers particularly deal with the issue of corporate responsibility. I know, Mikko, you are very interested in, and she actually realized, in fact, the Chinese government does have all these regulations about corporate responsibility, even in Africa, but she found out the private enterprises, Chinese private enterprises there, are not that aware of it. And while the state-owned ones, usually they know it. So it's quite interesting, and perhaps we can do more exchanges in this area.
Sure, yeah. Sure, that would be interesting, yeah. But maybe, yeah, if there wasn't other questions, so your question regarding, there's something now.
How important is the link of the thesis in getting employees?
I guess it depends. To me, not. I would say maybe not so interesting. But was it asked during the? Maybe it was. Maybe it was. It's it's still sort of, it's not the key thing, certainly, But if it's like, once again, employers looking at your CV, where did you study? What did you study? Of course, not just major, also minor. And, maybe if it's not written on your CV, but if you can tell, so what, if they're asking you, what have you studied? You have, for example, in the embassy, there are, by the way, in the embassy, if I got it right, there are two positions. One is for China related, one is the sinologist job, and there is the communication and culture. So for the sinologist especially, they will be asking, you to analyze or show some sort of experience of analyzing different questions. And if you have a pro gradu, thesis team which is relevant, it sounds interesting. It seems sort of like really knowledgeable. It's a good theme. It's a good question. So I think it's an added plus, certainly, in that process. So don't just write it because I know it's been there, have to write it, but try to make it somehow interesting.
Thank you, Mikko. I think now you can do the promotional thing for your society.
Yeah, shortly, just so as usually said, so doing as my hobby or outside the working hours. So being the chairman for the Finland-China Society. So actually, yes, there has been this really, let's say, long time project to have a real, Finnish-Chinese dictionary in Finland. There are some, in paper format, and during the decades, 80s, 90s, in 2000s. But not actually the type of dictionary where there's a sufficient amount of vocabulary, and also that there is not just word and a direct translation for that word, but also you have your opinions there, you have your examples from different examples in sentences for this word. So that was a week, 2 ago, this, which I find is the first really professional wide scope Finnish-Chinese dictionary, was published by Kielikone Oy on this MOT sanakirja website, which is and so and now Julie just sent on the chat box the link. So this is something actually from the society's point of view, from the Finland-China Society's point of view, this has been at least a 15-year project, to be honest, for those persons who have have started the work, and the actual sort of like the manuscript. It's I think we can also go back at least 25 years, but here we are. Actually, this hopefully is just the first phase of this project. So 46,000 words are the basis for this dictionary. But actually, the manuscript or the whole material is more than 100,000 words. So from one point of view, we are not even in the halfway yet. But for the continuation, we should find somewhere additional funding for continuing for the editing work. But it's a good start for the 6,000, and then it's online format, so it's much more flexible when it has to be updated. It's not perfect. Please, if you have you found out there are mistakes, I'm sure there are. Let us know. The problem though is that we don't have that many resources at the moment to handle that feedback, but still would welcome that. We are looking into the question how to modify it or get feedback and handle that feedback. So and hopefully it will be useful for all the Finnish or Finland-based Chinese students, Chinese language students, and the other way around as well. Unfortunately, just from Finnish to Chinese, not the other way around, but still, it's a start. So,
yeah, thank you. It's really amazing that you made this happen, and I think time is kind of up.
yeah.
Last call for questions. If not, I would like to thank you, Mikko, for sharing your journey with us. We learned a lot from you, and we show your ambition and your professionalism in really making your career, outstanding, and you contribute even back to the society. And so I hope that this can inspire our students, even despite the pandemic. You might feel a bit, gloomy, but there is hope. And I hope also all of you can stay healthy and keep in contact. Thank you.